So for EMDR therapy, this has been something that has been super helpful for me as an entrepreneur, mostly because I didn't realize that I had all these negative narratives about myself, and the way that I was showing up in work was kind of being diluted because of those negative narratives, mostly imposter syndrome, which I think a lot of people in business can relate to because at some point it creeps up and pops in, right? So we're going to be bringing in an expert, Nicole Mosey, founder of Core Mental Health Counseling. But I want to let you know that this video is not really getting into the weeds of like the technicalities of EMDR. It's more so talking about my experience as an entrepreneur going through the therapy and then being able to bounce that off of Nicole, who is a mental health counselor and owns a practice and understands the positive impact that this has had in the business community and specifically on entrepreneurs and business founders. All right, so let's get to the interview. So from my understanding, there's a couple different ways to actually implement it, right? So what I did was you cross your arms and you start tapping and when you close your eyes. And from my understanding, what this does is, like you're saying, left brain, right brain, there's some sort of change that happens there. And forgive me if I'm saying this wrong, kind of mimics REM sleep. Is that right? Where like and REM sleep is like where memories are processed, right? So like it's somehow kind of, is it actually putting you in a state of hypnosis technically, or what is it?
Yeah, so people, that's one of the critiques, or people are always like, is it hypnosis? Like, are you going to change me, the way that I think and stuff like that? So no, it's not hypnosis, but it does activate the REM sleep cycle. So you do you're in this like relaxed state where I think you're more open to kind of shifting. So the trauma memory gets stuck in a certain way, and this process of bilateral stimulation, so right to left brain thinking, whether it's tapping or you can watch the person's fingers go back and forth. That's the traditional method. That's what the I movement stands for the EM, and then desensitization and then reprocessing are those four letters. But yeah, it's not hypnosis or anything like that. But you're right. You have to be open-minded because you're not talking as much as you would think in traditional talk therapy. And then that's why a lot of clients like it, because they don't have to tell all the bad crap. You know what I mean? People there's some shame involved in that. They hold, secrets or trauma in close. They don't want to tell everything. So that's why a lot of clients like it, because they don't have to tell the details. And the counselors benefit because they're not hearing the bad stories over and over. So there's just less burnout. But yeah, it's just the right to left brain thinking, the bilateral stimulation. And I think it's cool. Like even kids could do it with like a race car or a crayon. It's just moving something back and forth and like watching. There's a light bar. You're just watching the thing go back and forth. So it's just tappers, all these different tools. But it's the same concept. And the original was the eye movements, where it's somebody's finger going back and forth. During COVID, it was cool because there was an app. Yeah, sorry, you're raising your hand. Go ahead.
I was going to say, like, just as you're talking, I'm realizing, I'm like, why it's difficult for somebody maybe who has an entrepreneurial mindset to get into this. Because
Yeah.
you may be type A, where you want to be in control. And you're like, wait a minute, like, you going to have full control of me? I'm going to be, talking like a chicken or something. Like, that's not
Yeah.
what it is. But
No.
B, it's also like you are giving up a little bit a sense of control, in the sense that you are like starting to dive deeper into things. So I can say from my own experience, like imposter syndrome has been a huge thing that I've had to like navigate through my entrepreneurial journey and even, professional career. And I didn't realize until I started doing EMDR with Stephanie that the process started taking me. So it'd always be like, oh, like think of this memory, like, and then I want you to tap on it. And that's all I would be doing. And I would be thinking of that memory and tapping on it. And it was weird how my brain, like if the memory is like, let's say it's this memory over here, it would go over here. Right. And it kept going over here. And then the next day we'd talk about this memory and it would go over here. And the next day we'd do it weekly, but it would go over here. And I'm like, what is this thing over here? Like, why does it keep going to this? And what I realized was it was like a childhood memory. And there's like, sometimes there's stuff on the bus. Sometimes it was like stuff that was going on at home. But I started kind of developing this like narrative that I'm like, you're an idiot. Nobody wants to hear what you have to say. Right. Like, so why don't you make a joke and then get out of the room or something, So that's why earlier I said, I think sometimes like if you have these little, tensions or things that are bugging you and you're not dealing with them, they become trees. The trees for me became push the feelings aside. You don't feel them, right? Focus, think your way through everything. But then it also kind of became like, especially in my 20s and when I was in my professional career, I always thought I was the dumbest person in the room. And I didn't know why that was until I did EMDR. And it's kind of like almost started like rooting out where these narratives started from. And the best analogy that I can give to it is that it was kind of like before I started doing EMDR, is it was like I was rowing a boat and I was trying to get across the lake and I would be rowing, but there was tons of holes in the boat, right? And you can feel the boat sinking because it's taking on water. So I'm trying to row harder and then I'm also bucketing out water. And this, trip across this lake is kind of like life for me, right? And I know like I'm very focused. I'm trying to get to this spot over there on the other side of the lake, but I am exhausted just like rowing this thing, right? So the cool thing with EMDR and doing this through Stephanie was we started off on this really small traumatic, if you want to call it, like, what was your first like negative memory? It was something that was so small it's laughable. And what we did is we started building up to tougher memories, right? But what I found, and you mentioned this earlier, you do the body scans at the end, and like every week she'd say like, how distressing is this memory? And I'd be like, it's a 5 out of 10, right? So then we'd process the memory and we'd do the EMDR therapy. And I would think about it, and then we'd install kind of like a new narrative. What would you prefer to believe that happened in that situation? I'd be like, oh, that was unusual. That wasn't on me. Like I shouldn't have been in that situation, whatever it might be, right? So then the next week, she would say, all right, last week, we talked about this memory. Like, think about it right now. What would you rate that on a scale of 1 to 10? And I'd be like, maybe a 1. Like, I don't know if I feel anything. And it's because I knew where I carried my stress, and I'm like, I'm paying attention to that. I'm like, there's nothing. Like, there's nothing there. I have no feeling to that memory. So I share this because I want to get your take on this. One of the things first, right? The process of starting with like a very small, memory that's like, it's maybe a 2 out of 10 as far as like how much discomfort it causes you. Why do you start there and then build as you get into those big scary memories? And the reason I want people to understand this is you're not going to get into this and somebody's going to be like, all right, boom, day one, right? Like, why
Yeah,
is that?
exactly. It's for success, right? So as entrepreneurs and, business owners, we like strive or like, we're so focused on making it work. And the same concept applies here. We call it a test run. We're going to do a sample, a small thing. Maybe it's a 2 out of 10 because we want it to work. And we want to work out all the kinks. We want to show you that, you don't just have to trust me because, I'm an expert. Like, let's trust the process because it's working for you. So when you come in and you say it's, a 2 out of 10, and the next week you come back and you say it's 0, it's a measure of the success of the practice of EMDR. So then we can build on the next thing, just small steps for success. That's the best answer I could give you on that. I mean, we see it work, but like we don't expect you just to come in and believe us. Like we want you to experience it. I guess that's what I'm saying. It's like experiential. Like you have to really experience, even the way you just described it. I feel like that was unique to your experience. It was so cool for me to hear, what you were talking about, the different places, like the memory was showing up. And people always ask me like, am I doing this right? And I always say like, there is no right or wrong. Like you're doing it right. Like there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's a totally different experience for every person. And we're trained to ask certain questions based on what you're telling us, your experiences. So yeah, it's just for success. I mean, and just showing you that it works and, you know, having a starting point really.
And I think for me too, one of the things that was helpful was like when I started with those little memories from EMDR that I focused on, is it kind of seemed like you're like building a resilience for it and like a muscle like to it, where like kind of almost like if you're going to go work out and you have a trainer, right? They're not going to be like, put the full stack on there and get underneath there and squat that because they know you can't do
Yeah.
it, right?
Yeah.
And I had some more, everyone's got memories that are, whatever. And then like things that are 10 out of 10. By the time I got to the 10 out of 10 memories, things that like I could not even think about, right? Like if I thought about them, I'm like, I don't even want to internally think about it. I can't do that. When I got to that time to do those with a therapist, it was just like, yeah, all right, we're going to do this one today. And it was just almost like this type of conversation you and I are having right now. When I think because I started here and kind of built up, that my body and my mind were like, you're okay. Like everything's going to be fine. You can do this, guy.
Yeah.
You
And
know?
every client is very different, and
Okay.
we ask the clients to help guide us on if they're ready. Like this morning I had a client, I was like, "Are we doing EMDR today?" And she's like, "No, I broke up with my boyfriend. We got to talk about this." So we put it on hold and we focused on what was happening that day. But the client is always their best, like they know themselves best. So we always check in at the beginning of the session and say like, "Where are you at today?" Like, are we going to on our list of things or not, so you know yourself better than anybody else. And I think, having that empowerment and remembering that is like super important. And yeah, I hope that makes sense.
It does. And you said something as far as your client, like, I need to talk about this today. Because I am, always viewing everything through the lens of the entrepreneur. So let's say there's an entrepreneur today that's just like, I just feel off, and this is something that I want to explore, not necessarily even EMDR, but like, I need to talk to somebody. Like, what's your advice to that person in that seat in that moment?
Yeah, first, I'm glad that they're here. I mean, I think it takes a lot for somebody, especially if they have this perfectionist or, avoidance of change, things that are scary. We want to kind of control things, I think, a little bit as an entrepreneur. We want to know that, this is a great investment, or the money is going to be there, or the next, contract is going to be signed. Like, we want to like know all those things. And it's scary, I think, to know that there's some of that that's out of our control, So I would validate the person that they're here. They're showing up and they're ready to explore, like you were talking about before, being open-minded, and honestly giving them the chance to process some of that. They come to a lot of their own conclusions. So I don't see myself really as the expert. I know that that's kind of the word that you're, referring to me as, but I think the client is the expert. I think they're the ones that know themselves best. And it's just like, I'm honored that people are joining me on the journey. I think it's a huge honor, and I'm excited to help them in whatever that looks like for them. And again, everybody needs something different. So just being open to the process and coming in and sitting on the, on the couch or the chair or doing it virtually is a huge step, but one that I think is transformational. And if the goal is success in the business, how can, taking care of my mental health be a part of that journey? And if that's the goal, then we're working on that, whatever that looks like for that person.
All right, in the next video, we want to talk about parts therapy. So this is a different type of therapy that I did, and it was tremendously helpful for getting alignment. This is really, really helpful if you're in a small team environment, right? Maybe it's just you, a solopreneur. What it does is allows you to make better decisions as a business owner once you understand your different parts of you that are coming into play when you're making decisions. So I highly, highly suggest you watch this next video on the screen right here, breaking down parts therapy for business owners.